those of you who've been keeping up with my channel, you may have noticed that I've gone with a pattern of reviewing games on the release date as an anniversary special. I feel it's something that can help differentiate me a bit. However, I'm making a special exception in this case since it's a pretty recent game and I want to get my thoughts out there. The Outer Worlds released just last year on October 25th, hyped up as the next big thing by the makers of Fallout New Vegas. However, does that translate to a good game in this case? Let's find out together as I review The Outer Worlds for PC. Right out of the gate, The Outer Worlds asserts itself as an RPG Fallout type of game wherein you make your own character. You get to determine their detail information, their traits, what they look like, all that good and happy stuff. After some dialogue basically saying that you were frozen in a hibernation chamber Futurama style, you start out in this brave new world. So far, this sounds like the devs are firmly Fallout New Vegas. Well, yes and no. If there's one thing that's aged poorly in New Vegas, especially vanilla, it's the shooting mechanics. I'm very pleased to report that that is not an issue here. The gunplay is more similar to Fallout 4, and that's very much an improvement. There's also a brand new mechanic called Tactical Time Dilation, or TTD. Some will compare it to VATS, but I completely disagree. Personally, I felt like VATS was more of a substitute for shooting if you really wanted a fully RPG and just wanted the game to aim for you. This isn't like that, it's more like a supplement to your shooting. It slows down the action to a Matrix level where you can establish your footing or do various things like blind the enemy with your shots. Shooting causes the meter to empty out fairly quickly, but just looking around it drains fairly slowly, so it's great for catching your breath or just dodging projectiles coming in from all sides. Now, where it and Fallout 4 greatly differ is that it puts a lot more emphasis on the RPG elements. I would argue it's more like the best aspects of 4 crossed with the best aspects of New Vegas because you don't really have to choose between better shooting or better RPG because both are in full force here. Dialogue skills even have effects on combat, which is a great way to handle speech-centric characters eventually having to fight at some point because it's not like you can reason with bandits and feral beasts. The skill points are pretty interesting up to the first 50 they're in a set, but you have to devote points to individual ones to get past that point. That's pretty neat as it makes being a jack of all trades very viable. You also get perks, of course, every other level, and you also get companions with their own perks. One interesting twist is that if you take damage from one thing long enough, you can choose to get a weakness for it in exchange for an extra perk point. I tend to not take that, because if I'm getting my ass kicked by something, I don't want to become even weaker to that thing. Your companions also get abilities that can charge up. I ended up using Max for a shotgun stun and Nyoka for a rapid fire ability, but you get a number of companions to choose from. There's even a robot in your ship that can serve as a companion, although I didn't pursue that quest. Naturally, there's durability for weapons and armor, and you can use parts to repair them. Rather than repair directly, you can scrap weapons and armor for parts, and if your engineering skill is high enough, you can repair on the fly without a workbench. The UI for your inventory is also very much improved over the Fallout games, as you don't have to trudge down a long list. Instead, they're in a grid and you hover over it to get information of it, much cleaner and much more organized, and it actually reminds me of the inventory from the 3D Zelda games. I mentioned your ship earlier, and that's because you get a ship in this game. Much like Metroid Prime Hunters in Prime 3 or Mass Effect, you can pilot your ship to different worlds. Well, not right away. You need a power regulator and possibly nav keys for each planet, but they become unlockable as they go. One really neat addition that I've never seen before is a disguise system. You holographically become a different person with an ID as long as you're in a restricted area. The catch is you have a limited meter that drains when you walk and only fills outside of those areas. You can fill it with a speech check if it starts to get low, but you have to plan your steps carefully if you don't want to end up in a firefight. Thankfully, the game is generous enough with points that you can typically get away with just making one speech check before making it to safety. While the game has a ton of dialogue, you can press space or whatever button the consoles use to skip dialogue. It's really striking that one guy actually managed to speedrun the game in around 12 minutes, so you can get straight to the action if you're so inclined. I simply chose not to because I like absorbing the story between firefights just to give some kind of context to my actions, but it's really great that the game gives you that option. Stealth is actually more similar to Battlefield 5 than Fallout. Please take your pitchforks away from my throat. What I mean is that there's a limited meter that fills when you're spotted, so you can quickly duck back into cover if they catch a glimpse of you. This makes stealth a lot more viable, although my character wasn't exactly built for stealth, so I ended up having to resort to firefights a lot. Thankfully, there are elemental advantages that help when that inevitably happens. Plasma is more effective against organics, electricity is more effective against robots, you know, the basic Pokemon type advantage type system. There are also science weapons with various effects, but I only briefly used the shrink ray, so that didn't get much use with me. Naturally, there's also a good variety of weapons to use as well. You've got melee weapons, pistols, shotguns, fully automatic weapons, sniper rifles, so there's no shortage of options here. Health is mostly shoving your face as usual, but it now has an inhaler that you can use to shortcut healing. Typically you want a Dreno to shove in your face as that's the stim pack equivalent, but other types seem to work too. The game also has an interesting way of handling quick saving, one that I think is very fair because it disables quick saving specifically for a combat situation which forces you to clear out a room or make the remaining enemies give up the chase before you can lock it in. Your downed companions will also revive unless you're on the hardest difficulty when combat is over. However, all damaged enemies instantly go back to full health when this happens, so make sure you inflict the killing blow before ending combat. One little oddity that's worth noting is that the open world will have micropauses where the game loads even when you're in the middle of outside. I have to assume it's some kind of Unreal Engine 4 limitation since it uses that. It's not exactly a deal breaker, far from it just means you'll have to wait a bit here and there. One neat little quirk is that unlike Bethesda games, NPCs won't follow you into owned areas if you're outside of their line of sight. This makes it really easy to fulfill your kleptomaniac tendencies behind closed doors, and I blame The Legend of Zelda for giving me the mindset that I can just take and smash anything I want. Whether this is a good or a bad thing kinda depends on you. You can actually talk yourself out of it if you're caught, but your reputation with an area will diminish as a result. To sum it up, The Outer Worlds has a very exceptional gameplay. People were expecting a New Vegas, but I'd say that comparison would be an insult because it improves over New Vegas in aspects that were shortcomings in that game. I may have had some crashing problems, but I won't hold it against the game, and when it ran well, I had a blast. Even as the game was kicking the teeth out of me, I still had fun with it from start to finish. Essentially, the game takes place in a galactic system called Halcyon. It starts out with your character being plucked out of suspended animation by an eccentric scientist named Phineas. You can tell that this is an Obsidian game and not a Bethesda one because it doesn't try to establish your character, especially like Fallout 4 did. You don't have some kind of deeply seated family connection, you're just some schmuck pulled out of a tank. The story is very open to you being whatever type of character you wish to be without any restraint. Me personally, I chose to be a bit of a mix between Hank Hill and the engineer from Team Fortress 2, a no-nonsense engineer from Texas with a silver tongue and a trigger finger, and the game was happy to oblige. You don't even have to side with Phineas, you can definitely side against him. I just chose not to, mainly because the other side is the board. Without spoiling anything, they're basically a group of corporations that's gained complete government control over the system with only a few independent spots in existence. They're kinda greedy and tyrannical, and their plan just sounds backwards, so yeah. Now that may sound like the story is completely black and white, but you'd be wrong. Joining the revolt against the board actually isn't morally perfect either. It follows the whole argument on whether it's better to have flawed structure or do away with it and have absolute freedom at the cost of security and a lot of the organization. The grays may be a bit dark and light compared to New Vegas, but I still never felt like Fallout 4 with the Institute just being absolutely evil and the Minutemen being basically saints. Anyway, after your character gets sent out via an escape pod, you accidentally land on Captain Hawthorne, the guy you were supposed to meet up with. Apparently the idiot stood a little too close to the homing beacon. In any case, you head into his ship and the ship's AI, after a brief conversation, christens you the new Captain Hawthorne, so the ship is now yours. You just need a power regulator in order to actually fly off in the damn thing. No worries, just head to the nearby town of Edgewater, and after talking with Reed, you have to make a choice. There's a power regulator in both Edgewater and a community of deserters who chose independence over board control, and you have to fight through robots in a geothermal plant to decide which one to cut power from. I basically chose to cut the power to the city, so I grabbed their power regulator and went on my way, but it's not as though Reed is a complete monster either. I got the feeling that he was never really malicious in his intentions, and I really wanted the deserters to come back into the family, so to speak. I'll try not to reveal anything major to the story from this point on to avoid spoilers, but basically you want a nav chip to get to this other planet, help a guy get his broadcast up and running while making another moral choice between the board and separatists, and so on and so forth. The characters are also generally in-depth enough that they actually feel like people and not just a means to a narrative end. I especially grew fond of the ship's AI, Ada. She has a snarky charm that kinda reminds me of GLaDOS from Portal. Only, you know, a lot less happy-go-slaughter, although she'll apparently creepily cheer you on if you decide to play that role yourself. I wouldn't know personally, since I actually deliberately went out of my way to avoid killing as much as possible, except of course for bandits and feral creatures, because there's no reasoning with them. Naturally, there's also a lot of side quests you can optionally do, including quests for your companions, so there's a lot to do in the game. I myself mainly focused on the story missions, but maybe I'll return to it myself one day. There are just so many other things on my plate that it'll have to wait a little while. Basically what I'm trying to say is the game excels on a plot point as much as it does a gameplay one. It's definitely got that Obsidian-style level of depth where both sides can make a compelling case, and it's ultimately down to subjective opinion even if one of them seems completely unsustainable and the other one is making a huge gamble. A+ on the plot. Apart from the shooting, another thing Fallout New Vegas Vanilla didn't age so well in was the presentation. No, don't get me wrong, on a technical level it was actually pretty good for its time, but that ugly sepia tone really hurt the aesthetic, wasteland desert or not. As you can probably tell by this video, Outer Worlds seeks to move away from this in favor of a very colorful and vibrant little game world, and I really appreciate it. The people are just stylized enough to not be uncanny, and just about everything from the industrialized geothermal plant to the luscious city of Byzantium or even the nauseous green acid pools is absolutely full of charm and personality. I'd even go so far as to say the presentation even kinda reminds me of the Borderlands in a way, not just because there's a corporate government tyrannically iron-fisting everyone. A lot of the industrialized sections also remind me of BioShock in only the best possible way, of course. Even the feral creatures are very stylized and unique from one another, such as the Manti and Raptidons. They've even got rat-type creatures, and they range from regular Fleeful types to ferals and even a big fat version. Talk about rodents of unusual size, huh? The particle effects are also very pleasant to look at, from the spark of an electrical weapon to the nice bloomed-up blast of a plasma shot. It's all got such a good balance to it, and it really brings this intergalactic game to life. The voice acting is also quite good, especially from the main characters. Phineas has that nice amount of charming and earnest to his personality, but he's also maybe a little unhinged from all of his experiments.
Normally, reviving someone after so long leads to some quite horrifying results. It's called explosive cell death, but it's really more of a liquefaction.
The game has mockery ads on a lot of the loading screens, and it's funny how some of them really poke fun at predatory consumerism practices such as diet crazes. Seriously, who in the world thinks that diet toothpaste could be a thing? What, is it gonna suck the fat rat out of your teeth? There's also one where you can get fake windows on your house, not for practical reasons, just so it looks nice. It's nice little absurd things like that that really make the world come alive, and the music is also quite nice too. From a presentation standpoint, the Outer Worlds excels just as much as it does its other categories. It's a very gorgeous game, and it's really easy on the ears too, and it's very clear that Obsidian really put a lot of heart and soul into the game. It's only a shame my computer really didn't like the pre-rendered cutscenes, but there's always YouTube for that. The expectation going in was that the Outer Worlds would be the next Fallout New Vegas, but I'm pleased to say it's so much more than that. While Fallout New Vegas had excellent writing, it was weighed down heavily by a restricted deadline and budget as well as the creation engine in general. They didn't make Fallout New Vegas, they made the next evolutionary step beyond New Vegas and produced a game that truly is designed to be a very enjoyable game on all fronts. You can tell they really took to heart the problems that people had with Bethesda's Fallouts as well as their own, and really did a good job taking the best of both worlds. I only wish my damn computer wouldn't cause the game to crash so much. That was a real source of frustration as I played it. There was also a dialogue delay bug that came in from time to time, but if you can look past the technical shortcomings, The Outer Worlds truly is a gorgeous sci-fi RPG shooter, and I highly recommend it.